program is brought to you by Agnes Scott College. For more information about Agnes Scott College, please visit our website at agnesscott.edu.
Good evening and welcome to Agnes Scott College for the 2013 James Ross McCain Faith and Learning Lecture. I'm Kate Pelusiestes, the Julia Thompson Smith Chaplain for the college. We're honored to have our speaker with us this evening, and I know you'll enjoy hearing from her tonight. But before I get into introductions, I have a few housekeeping items. I'm going to ask you to please silence all your noisemakers, cell phones, iPads. My list says pagers, but does anybody actually use pagers anymore? There will be a time for questions at the end of Bishop Carcaño's presentation, and you're invited to use the microphones in the center aisles so that you can be heard by everyone. Now, it's my distinct pleasure to introduce our speaker, a tireless advocate for justice in all of its forms. Bishop Minerva Garza Carcaño is a third-generation Methodist, originally from Edinburgh, Texas, who experienced her call to ministry as a child and has faithfully lived and worked within the church ever since. She's married to Thomas Spaniolo, a lawyer specializing in immigration and criminal law, and they have a daughter, Sophia, who is a student at Columbia College in Chicago. Bishop Carcaño is a graduate of the University of Texas Pan American and Perkins School of Theology at SMU, where she later directed the Mexican American program, the Spanish language course of study school, and the Hispanic studies program. Following her ordination as a United Methodist elder in 1979, she pastored congregations or served as a district superintendent in Texas, California, New Mexico, and Oregon. She was elected a bishop in 2004 and served the Phoenix Episcopal area, the Desert Southwest Conference, from 2004 to 2012. In July 2012, she was assigned to the Los Angeles Episcopal area, which is the Cal-PAC Conference, of which there are some members here who are happy. They have come a long way as well. In addition to writing extensively, Bishop Carcaño has been a tireless preacher, teacher, and speaker at United Methodist Interfaith, Justice, Human Rights, and Immigration Reform events all over the U.S., Brazil, Argentina, Cuba, Mexico, Zimbabwe, and Switzerland. Her work has received numerous recognitions from a variety of groups and organizations. She's been an outspoken justice advocate on many fronts, including the Reconciling Ministries Network of the United Methodist Church, seeking full inclusion for LGBTQ persons within the Methodist system. She's quoted as saying of the conversations, "We are working hard to create an inclusive church." She's also been actively involved in interfaith advocacy, being recognized by the Arizona Interfaith Movement as a person who has demonstrated out living the golden rule in their daily interaction with people and institutions in the community. Certainly relevant to our presentation tonight, she's been a tireless advocate for human rights, and particularly as pertains to the issues of immigration in the United States. And in my own experience just today with her, as she has interacted with students and others across campus, she carries with her a deep feeling of welcome and an innate hospitality, which make her stance on immigration a clear welcome of the stranger, the immigrant, the sojourner. So please join me in welcoming Bishop Minerva Garza Carcaño.
Good evening. It's wonderful to be here at Agnes Scott and to have the great privilege of coming before you to render this James Wilson King Faith and Learning lecture. It's been such a wonderful day, just an incredible day. My daughter is at Columbia College. I regret that I didn't come here before she went to Columbia College, so I kind of shepherded her this way. I've been amazed at the wonderful, wise, confident young women that I've met throughout the day. It's a wonderful experience to be on this campus. It gives me great hope. I was sitting there thinking, as my daughter Sophia has a daughter, it gives me a granddaughter. I'm bringing her to Agnes Scott. I've been quite moved by the conversation. I go to many places, as Chaplain Kate has mentioned, and sometimes it's very difficult to engage people in conversation. But I have been engaged and embraced and welcomed, invited into very deep and profound conversation about justice in general, immigration in particular, and indeed it does give me a sense of hope for this country and for the world. And I'm going to be more attentive to what happens and what comes out of this school. Thank you for welcoming me into your life and into your body on this evening and throughout this day. It was an incredible opportunity to be in Las Vegas, Nevada last week when President Barack Obama unveiled his plan for comprehensive immigration reform. President Obama was clearly feeling very confident, extremely confident. The room was filled with supporters galore. That whole room had many supporters. In addition, the voters had spoken. Nevada had been one of those swing states that he'd been able to win because of the turnout of Hispanic voters. Hispanic voters who had very clearly said to him, "We continue to hang in there with you because we hope and expect that you will bring about comprehensive immigration reform." CNN and Pew had done a post-election poll to determine the spirit of the country in terms of immigration reform, and they learned that the majority of the U.S. population in their thinking about immigration reform had shifted. The majority of the population in this country now favors comprehensive immigration reform. So the time was right. It was perfect time. President Obama declared that immigration reform was common sense, eloquently reminding us of the fact that the U.S. is a country of immigrants. Immigrants are not them, they are us, he said. He commended the bipartisan team of U.S. senators that the day before had unveiled their principles for immigration reform. He encouraged ongoing congressional bipartisan work on this tough issue. But then he took our breath away when he said, however, if Congress doesn't come soon with a bill for comprehensive immigration reform, I will bring my own bill and request an immediate answer to my bill. He took our breath away. It was quite an amazing moment that the President of the United States would view immigration reform as important enough to bring the authority of the presidential office to influence and even lead the legislative process until we reach the goal of true immigration reform. It was nothing short of incredible. But then President Obama began that political dance that frightens every undocumented immigrant in this country and profoundly troubles all of us who stand with them. As President Obama unveiled his immigration reform plan, he began with securing the border and employer verification. I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. I experienced this audible silence in that whole room. He went on to say that immigration reform, in his opinion, needed to include a pathway to citizenship for undocumented immigrants, but then he qualified it. He qualified justified it by stating that undocumented immigrants would need to earn their citizenship by going to the back of the line of those who are being processed. Our president was dancing with all his might, trying to pull in dance partners from the full spectrum of immigration opinion. Now I understand that immigration reform is a complex issue that will require much buy-in from local, state, and federal government, from communities, from labor and business sectors, and I hope that will include religious leaders as well. But I believe that we know how broken our immigration policy is, and I believe that we know how to fix it. What it's going to take is our being honest and truthful enough and a willingness to strive for the common good. For starters, I believe that many of you, from what I've heard this day, understand that there is no line for undocumented immigrants in this country to join in order to be processed for citizenship. There's simply a mass of persons who have waited for decades to be processed. There are insufficient visas for those who are here or who are coming out of human need or who are even being actively lured by our economic needs and businesses. The backlog of those seeking documentation has grown to a crippling level. The documentation process is a maze, a totally incomprehensible maze that shifts with every immigration judge who post 9/11 has been given very subjective authority over the petitions and the lives of immigrants. We can do better. And our immigrant brothers and sisters are ready to add to their already well-documented contributions to this country by paying back taxes, by paying fines and fees for an opportunity to become residents and perhaps even citizens of this country. In terms of securing the border, there was a 2010 study of the cost of upholding the present immigration policies of this country from 1996, the year that our present immigration policy was established, to 2010, 2 years ago. The U.S. had spent $39 billion to secure the southern border between the U.S. and Mexico. Now, this is the amount that's been used to place sensors in the ground, high towers in the sky with blinding detector lights, and to employ and equip Border Patrol agents who have been sent to cover that border from San Diego to Brownsville. This does not include the cost of the wall. And if you come to San Diego, you'll see that there's not one wall, but 3 parallel walls. And so maybe this is why I'm beginning to hear that there's an additional $10 billion that has been spent, and it's gone into building these walls. Can you imagine what a difference this country could have made in this whole hemisphere if we used $49 billion for the common good? If we thought about the poor and the hungry, not only within this country, but in this northern hemisphere, how much good we might have brought about. There are today enough Border Patrol men and women who have been assigned to patrol our southern border from San Diego to Brownsville, that some have said that if they all lined up down the border, they would be able to see each other all the way to the Gulf of Mexico. That there are that many. We have thoroughly militarized the border. I grew up in South Texas. I remember that you would drive 60 miles out of the Rio Grande Valley and you'd have to stop so that Border Patrol could check to make sure that you were not undocumented. And so we would drive to Laredo and stop, we would drive to Corpus and stop, we would drive on our way to San Antonio and stop. And we felt that that was unfair. Well, morph that, multiply that, because we know fully, thoroughly Now, what we've been hearing under the Obama administration has been that they're going to focus on only deporting the criminal element out of the undocumented population in this country. Well, some of us believe that 400,000 plus a year is more than the criminal element in the undocumented immigrant community. During President Obama's first term, 2 other religious leaders and I met with the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, Janet Napolitano. We spent about 3 hours with her one evening. And in that meeting, she told us that the border is more secure today than it has ever been. Out of frustration, she stated to us that the Department of Homeland Security had met every single goal that Congress had given it for securing the border. But she said, every time we get to that goalpost, Congress moves the goalpost further up. I was at a United Nations related global conference on migration December a year ago in Geneva. As I prepared for that conference, I learned that it was a multi-year conference that was created by the United Nations, intended to foment a global conversation about determining just and humane ways to address global migration. I also learned that former UN Secretary General Kofi Annan had helped create the conversation because there had been a negative response on the part of the United Nations, and he didn't want to see it squelched. In fact, this year, that 10-year conversation will come back to the United Nations. How it started was that leaders from around the world dedicated to justice for migrants had worked to petition the United Nations to establish basic global principles for the protection of the human rights of migrants globally. But while there were some nation-states and members of the United Nations that were ready to step forward and say, yes, there were some countries that opposed principles of basic human justice for immigrants globally, and the leading negative vote was the United States. It was the United States. When I arrived at this global conference, I engaged in conversation with everyone that I possibly could, and almost every person I spoke to told me the same thing. They said to me with urgency that just and humane global migration depends on the United States above every other nation. And they would go on and tell me about how those things we were doing in the United States were being duplicated in their own countries. And then, to a person, they said to me, now, don't tell us to tear down our walls while you keep building higher walls. They would tell me that with a grin, but with truthfulness. Employer verification was another point in President Obama's call for immigration reform. Punishing employers who hire undocumented immigrants is part of the President's plan. Now, we've been living with employer verification. It sounds very simple. It sounds like a basic process. It sounds like maybe an economic thing we should do. But the country's employer verification program has been shown to be so fraught with error that even documented people, even residents and citizens are affected by the errors that are made in our system. You add to that the bias of some regions in this country, and you've got beyond those undocumented immigrants who are being left without employment opportunities as well. You have employers who consistently say that they are hiring immigrants because they can't find anyone else to do the kinds of jobs that they need. Landscaping, construction, those kinds of jobs. Agricultural jobs, most definitely. They hire immigrants, and many of them undocumented immigrants, because there aren't others in this country who are willing to do those jobs. I need to be very clear about something that many of you already know, but it merits saying and saying again, and that is that the immigrants who come forth to fill these jobs join the working poor among us. They join the working poor, a whole other broader issue that we Parker, the CEO of U.S. Airways, and Phil Francis, the CEO of PetSmart, who argued that the economy of this country depends on the labor of immigrants, and who are openly advocating for comprehensive immigration reform because, in their words, it makes good business sense. But this is just the numbers side. How easily we forget the human side. There are an estimated 11 million undocumented immigrants in this country today. And if they are not allowed to work, then how will they feed their children? How will they keep a roof over their family's head? How will they care for the medical needs of their loved ones? How will they keep their children in school? How will they support their congregations of faith? How will they enjoy the basics of life? How will they survive? President Obama praised hardworking immigrants for their contributions to the economy of this country. He went as far as saying that immigrants will help us rebuild the vanishing middle class in the United States. And so I would ask, is leaving 11 million people in this country without work the way to treat persons who sustain our economy and give us the possibility of restoring the country and the middle class? I think not. A few days before Christmas, I received a desperate call from a friend. Her husband had been detained by the local county sheriff's department, and he'd readily been processed as an undocumented immigrant, which he is. Laura and Bernardo are both undocumented immigrants. They've lived in this country for over 20 years. They have 3 U.S.-born daughters. They are hardworking people. Laura cleans homes from Monday to Friday. Bernardo works as a landscaper. In the evenings, if that wasn't enough work already that they'd already done, in the evenings together, they clean an office building. They are some of the hardest working people I know, some of the most generous and gracious people I know. They called me, and I said, what happened? Well, Bernardo had been in the landscaping company's vehicle with 3 other men on the way to a landscaping job. The driver, who is an immigrant, is documented. The sheriff's department deputy had stopped them, claiming that he noticed that their vehicle was leaking oil. You ever had your car leak oil? As an officer of the law, ever stopped you? There are questionable reasons for stopping people, and this is one of the many excuses that are being used all across this country to stop people of color, because just by the very look of their skin, their way of being, the way they dress, it's assumed that they must be undocumented immigrants. Unjustifiable reasons. Well, all of them, including the documented person, were handed over to ICE and sent to detention centers. Just like so many others across this country, immigrants like them are sent to detention centers all over this country. Detention centers that have made it big business to serve as depositories of men and women whose crime is a civil violation of being in the country without adequate immigration documents. Bernardo spent Christmas in detention. His family suffered without him. They particularly suffered not knowing what would happen to their family. But he's among the fortunate. He is surrounded by a community faith, so they found him legal representation. They posted his bail. Early this year, he was able to be released. He's working. I received another call from Laura 2 nights ago. They had been gone. Their 3 girls were home. Some men dressed in suits came looking for Bernardo. It's probably nothing, but the fear of that family is incredible. They had closed all the shutters, all the blinds. The girls had gone to a back room. They called their mother. They said, you must come home. Something's happening. They're calling for Papa. What's going on? The And so they called for a word of comfort. 11 million undocumented people in this country, families, live under that kind of fear. Allow me to say a bit about detention centers, for-profit detention centers in this country. I was a bishop in the Phoenix area for 8 years, and part of those 8 years were spent working with the government there and our governor, Janet Brewer, and sometimes having difficult sessions with her. And one of the most difficult experiences was facing the passage of Senate Bill, Arizona Senate Bill 1070. One of the most hateful bills. It was deportation by attrition. The people themselves would be so fearful because of this law that they would self-deport. And that did indeed happen in the state of Arizona. But some of us, bishops and others, were working hard on opposing this severe anti-immigrant bill. One day asked each other, who is benefiting? Who is benefiting from a bill such as SB 1070? And we began to do some research, and we learned that one of the major benefactors of SB 1070 was for-profit prisons. They were giving significant dollars to all that had gone into promoting that bill and the passage of the bill. This was in April of 2010. The next year, in 2011, I get a desperate call from our Board of Church and Society in Washington, D.C., and they said to me, do you know what the Corrections Corporation and the GEO group are doing? I had no idea what they were doing. I had learned a little bit, but not much. I learned that the Corrections Corporation of America and the GEO group, two for-profit detention center corporations, prison corporations, were asking the governors of the 50 states, of every state in this country, to consider entering into an agreement with them. Here was the agreement. They would come in and run the prisons and run detention centers for the states. What would the state promise? The state would promise that the state would keep those detention centers and prisons filled for 20 years at a 90% capacity. Now, can you imagine an agreement between a governor and a state and a for-profit corporation, detention prison center corporation, saying, we'll enter this contract with you, we'll run your prisons, but you got to keep them full. And the contract has to be for 20 years. And so we, United Methodist bishops, joined bishops of other denominations and quickly sent letters to all the governors saying, do not go there. Do you know what this means to the poor, to the immigrant? Do you know what this means to our young people and to our families? That our states would align themselves to have full prisons for 20 years? Align ourselves with these for-profit agencies? Those are some of the moves of big business that are prevalent in this conversation around immigration. Some of the hidden layers. We must ask, who profits in keeping 11 million people in the dark, in the shadows of this country? Who profits that we have these systems under our immigration policy that is filling up more and more detention centers for longer and longer periods? It is corporations like the Corrections Corporation of America and the GEO. But Michael's recent experience reminded me of another Christmas not that long ago when I was asked to join others in sharing prayers and presents with a woman who had just had a baby. That woman had spent the Advent season sitting at Estrella Jail in Maricopa County, Arizona. I can't begin to imagine being pregnant and sitting in a jail on Star Night, even if the jail is called Star, Estrella. She he had been detained by infamous Sheriff Joe Arpaio's deputies under the suspicion of being undocumented. And she suffered indignity and cruelty and inhumanity that no person should ever have to suffer. She was pregnant when she was detained. Her due date was January the 4th, but on the week leading up to Christmas, she went into labor. She was taken to a local hospital. The doctor told her that she would need a C-section. The condition for her having been granted the opportunity to go to this hospital to deliver her baby was that she was shackled to her bed. She was shackled to her surgical bed. Now, it doesn't take much medical experience to know that a woman who's about to give birth and who needs a C-section is not going to run. Not going to run along. But that was the way that she was treated. When the baby was born, she was not allowed to touch that baby or to hold that baby by Sheriff's Department orders. Now, why would anyone do that? Why would anyone do that to this woman? We are convinced, those of us who worked in that area and in this issue of concern, is that she was treated in that way, and we now learn that other women have been treated in similar ways, and men have been treated in other humiliating and terrible and torturous ways. But she was treated that way in order to intimidate and humiliate the immigrant population of that community. Sheriff Joe Arpaio is under indictment by the U.S. Department of Justice for racial profiling and for the violation of the civil and human rights of immigrants and of people of color. Yet the good people of Maricopa County just reelected him for another term as sheriff. They just reelected him. But it's not a reflection just of the heart of the people of Maricopa County in Arizona. Sheriff Joe Arpaio is the hero of anti-immigrant advocates all over this country. There's a prevalent deep hatred of immigrants throughout this country today that is shameful. History has shown that there's always discrimination expressed towards the next wave of immigrants, but color and thus racism always skews the discrimination to a deeper level. The immigrants of the end of the last century and the beginning of this new century are brown, black, and yellow, and their experiences of hatred and rejection, their experiences of racism are profound. In this century, I believe that our rampant consumerism is also a negative impact, negative attitude toward the immigrant. There are reasons. There are reasons that have brought 11 million undocumented persons to this country. Most immigrants will tell you that they would prefer to be at home, that they would much rather be in their home countries with their families than be here. Persons migrate because of war, because of political and religious persecution, because of natural disasters, and for economic reasons. I would venture to say that a great majority of the 11 million undocumented immigrants in this country today are here because of economic reasons. And our U.S. economic policies have impacted those economic reasons. You remember NAFTA. In 1992, the U.S., Canada, and Mexico adopted the North American Free Trade Agreement. NAFTA was negotiated and it was perfected under the administration of William Clinton. It was implemented under the administration of George H.W. Bush. In other words, it was a bipartisan agreement. They are all complicit. NAFTA is a regional economic agreement that so undermined the Mexican economy that one of its negatively great effects, is the fact that it cost 2 million plus Mexican corn farmers their businesses and their livelihood. Corn is a basic staple in Mexico, so corn farming is basic to the culture and to the economy of Mexico, but Mexican corn farmers with small agricultural businesses could not compete with the U.S. subsidized corn that NAFTA said Mexico would have to buy from the United States. So what do 2 million farmers and their families do when they are left destitute because of regional economic agreements with the United States? Well, they migrate. They migrate to any place that will help them survive. What would we do in such a situation? I was sitting in a chapel in Nogales, Sonora, Mexico, one cold evening with a group of United Methodist bishops and about 100 repatriated immigrants. These immigrants had crossed over into the U.S. illegally. Many of them had spent days in the desert, long days and long nights without food and water. They finally been detained by Border Patrol, and then they had been deported by simply being dumped at the border. Just dumped. That was it. Figured out. Just dumped at the border. We bishops were there to learn about their immigrant experience, to figure out what we needed to do, how we needed to lead God's people to be responsive to the situation of these immigrants. And we heard story after story from men and women, couples with little children, stories about poverty and incredible human suffering. As a bilingual person, I was asked to moderate the conversation with those 100 immigrants sitting in that chapel. And so I just started going down the aisle, inviting people to tell us their story if they felt free to do so, if they felt comfortable to do so. As I moved closer and closer to the back, I began to notice this small, indigenous-looking man. His skin was very weather-worn. He had a hat on, and he bowed into his hat. Even though it was night and it was dark in that chapel, he kind of bowed into his hat and wringed his hands. As I got closer, he removed his hat and he looked up at me and very meekly raised his hand. And I invited him to share. And he said with the humblest of voice, he said, "Would you carry a message for us?" And I said, "Yes, if we're able, we will." He said, "Would you ask your president and the people who live in your country why they hate us so? Would you tell them that we simply want to work so that we can feed our children?" And he put his hat back on and bowed into his hat so that I could no longer see his face. But I remember his face, and I remember his voice, and I remember his soul. And it humbles me. NAFTA was built on a long-standing practice of twin plants. You remember the twin plants or the maquiladoras that once lined the U.S.-Mexico border? Production companies built plants on the U.S. side of our southern border to distribute products that were made in their twin plants on the Mexican side of the border. It's a system of cheap labor in order to provide U.S. consumers with inexpensive products like televisions and hair dryers and microwave ovens and automobile tires and clothes. Well, when those twin plants were built, people from the interior of Mexico came to the border for these jobs. They offered to pay a little more than they were making where they were living. But after a season, U.S. companies and others practicing this economic strategy of twin plants found cheaper labor in other parts of the world and moved on. They just simply picked up shop and moved on, leaving thousands of workers unemployed in border cities that were already struggling economically and couldn't integrate all of these people in healthy and hopeful ways. Well, many of those persons came to this country as well. They've been summarily abandoned because cheaper labor could be found somewhere else. Do you see what the world is seeing? Do you see what others see as they look at us? A nation that without any sign of moral conscience enters into regional and global economic agreements and strategies that leave behind a trail of humanity that's used for our wants and then discarded like old broken machines. A country that's able to receive the benefits of a labor force right here among us, but that then turns and treats that labor force like the lowest on a caste system, in a caste system. Men and women who are forced to live in the shadows of the darkness of injustice. A country that has allowed the detention of immigrants and the poor to become an acceptable big business in the United States. A society that turns a blind eye to a baby being born to a mother who is shackled. A nation that has convinced itself that security is found in building higher and more walls. A country full of hypocrisy that claims its immigrant roots, but only as little more than a romanticized story. A country that continues to deceive itself into thinking that it is still the moral leader of the world. The truth is that we are today a country in need of the reformation of our heart. And this reformation will require that we confess that our present immigration policy is not only broken, but evil and unjust, and whose enforcement thereof results in immediate and insufferable human rights violations, discrimination, and oppression. We must also declare that being an undocumented person is not a crime. We are not seeing 11 million plus criminals. We are seeing people whose violation is a civil violation born out of the need to survive. We need to quit treating immigrants as common criminals. I really got in touch with this point at a very profound level when I first met up close a group of dreamers. I'd gone to Los Angeles way before I was ever called to be the bishop there, and some students from UCLA asked whether they could visit with me about immigration. They were early dreamers. They were 3 students. One of them was from Mexico, one of them was from Central America, and one was from Korea. I remember they came to meet with me in a hotel, and they didn't want to be in any public place, and so we went behind a pillar where no one could see us. And there they shared their stories. What most impressed me about them was how burdened they were. These were bright young students. They were concerned about their future, but they were also concerned about their families and about the immigrant community. They felt ostracized. They felt controlled. They felt imprisoned. They'd been made to feel like criminals. They were young people who had been brought to this country as children. But no one was listening to the fact that the U.S. Supreme Court has said that children will not be punished by the wrongdoing of their parents. No one was listening to the fact that for the Christian community, we believe that children do not bear the burden of their parents' sin. They were speaking to me in that moment when there was a national conversation about not giving citizen rights even to the children of immigrants who were put here in violation of the 14th Amendment. These young people were living in fear because they'd been criminalized. And it made it so abundantly clear to me that our undocumented immigrants are experiencing that sense of being criminalized, when in fact they are hardworking men and women, obedient to the laws of this country, trying to make a way for their families, willing to do all that they can in order to be documented, but facing a broken system. I believe that immigration is the social justice issue of our day, and that our response to this justice issue will determine our character and will determine the future of our country. we are in need of reformed hearts. I also believe that how our churches and our communities of faith in general treat the immigrant will shape our future as well. Unfortunately, in spite of what we say we believe, and all of our faith traditions speak about welcoming the immigrant, loving the immigrant, the Hindu tradition says that in the immigrant and the sojourner we see God, God's self. We see God in the immigrant. All of our faith traditions speak in that way about our immigrants, about immigrants among us. But even then, so many of our churches and communities of faith are in need of a reformed heart as much as our country needs a reformed heart. All around me, I see so many people of faith struggling to live the word of faith about immigrants, struggling to allow our own sense of Christian faith or Jewish faith or Hindu faith to guide us, to be a guiding truth or a formative principle. While our voice as people of faith could be a healing balm, could be a force of compassion toward the immigrant among us, a moral compass for this country, so many of us who claim faith as central to our lives have instead chosen to join the shrill voice of unfounded fear and injustice toward the immigrant. We too need reformed hearts. In the midst of it all, I believe that God has sent immigrant men and women and children to help reform our hearts, angels to guide us to a better place. My most beloved heart angels have been two little Mexican children whose names are Jocelyn and Melvin. How do you like that for good Mexican names? Jocelyn and Melvin. They were 10 and 8 years old when I met them, an older sister and a younger brother. I met them with their father. Two of us, a staff member and I, have gone down to the border to do some volunteer work. It was good for my soul at that moment. It continues to be good to my soul, for my soul, to do this kind of work. But we'd gone to the border and we'd spent about 4 days ministering to immigrants. They had no idea who we were. They just knew that we were there for them. We joined this larger group, an interfaith group, that day in and day out serves immigrants who are repatriated, immigrants who have been here and who are detained and then repatriated, sent just across the border as I described earlier. The volunteers that we joined have a tent on the southern side of the border, and they receive these repatriated immigrants. They give them a cup of ramen soup, they give them some water to drink, they wash their feet, they cut away the most horrible blisters I have ever seen, they bandage their feet, they give these immigrants who are tired, weary, disoriented, lost, have no sense of how they're going to take the next step. They give them a bit of orientation. And so my colleague and I were at this tent of mercy and compassion the day that I met Jocelyn and Melvin. A busload had come, and in fact during that day 3 or 4 busloads of immigrants had come, and this was the very last busload. It was about 5 o'clock in the afternoon. We thought we were done, and then suddenly here comes another busload of immigrants. And we welcomed them. The group was ahead of my colleague and I welcoming these immigrants. We had stayed behind, putting away some of the things that we had been working with. And we were moving towards the immigrants, and these volunteers were all headed back when someone said, "There's another one, and he's hurt." And so my colleague and I rushed over to the bus because we caught a glimpse of this young man. We saw him as he came off of the bus hobbling and struggling, and rushed over to hold him up. We thought he might have broken his leg or hurt his ankle. That happens often for immigrants who are crossing the river or out in the desert. And we got right up to him and held him up and asked him if he was all right. And he said yes, that he was all right. He had been born with a deformity in his leg, and so he did walk with a kind of a hobble in his walk. It was after we knew that he was all right that we realized that he was not alone. Right behind him, holding on to his shirt tail, were Jocelyn and Mel. And so it was my responsibility to bring this family over to a place where they could be ministered to, where they could be cared for. And it was such a wonderful, wonderful privilege. I asked about his wife, I asked about Jocelyn and Melvin's mother, and the father said that she was very ill, critically ill in southern Mexico. And they got to that point where they had no more money, no more food, no way to care for this mother and this wife. And so they left her in the care of the man's parents and had trekked all the way across Mexico. Imagine being a father with a 10 and an 8-year-old crossing the whole country and then wandering in the desert in a foreign country looking for a way to eat and stay alive, finding a job in order to send money back home to care for that mother who was ill. They indeed did get lost. They were with 20 plus other people who were being smuggled into the country by a coyote. They got separated from the group. He had a cell phone. He'd been given a cell phone, and he got a call in the middle of the desert one day. He was asked where he thought he was, so he described where he was. And they said, "We're sending someone for you," and his heart was lifted. And indeed, someone came, another coyote. But when the coyote saw that it was a man who had this impediment, physical impediment with these 2 little children, instead he took the last few dollars that father had in his pocket and left them in the desert. And so they wandered in the desert for a number of days, ran out of food, ran out of water. He was telling me this story, this father was, as I was on my knees washing his feet, trying to be ever so careful because his feet were just as blistered as many other immigrants who made that journey. His 2 little children, Jocelyn and Melvin, were leaning over his shoulders, just watching and listening to their own story. He said to me, on the 4th day, I thought that I had lost my little boy, that I lost Melvin because he fainted on the desert floor. I couldn't look up at that father or that child when he told me that. But finally I regained my composure, kept washing his feet, looked up and looked at Melvin. Melvin was on this side, Jocelyn was on this side, and I said to him, "Melvin, you are such a brave boy." And without missing a beat, Melvin looked at his sister and said to me, "I'm not as brave as my sister. She never fainted." It was a tender moment. Jocelyn got red. It was an incredible, tender moment. Angels that come to touch our heart and reform our spirit. But there's more. There's more to the story. At the end of that evening, Jocelyn and Melvin and their father and 4 or 5 other immigrants were left under the tent, not knowing quite what to do or where to go. My colleague and I were scheduled to leave, so we looked at each other and we instinctively knew what we needed to do. So we took all the dollars we had in our pockets, which weren't too many dollars, and we put them together and we put them in the hands of Jocelyn and Melvin's father. We knew that there were other immigrants, and we thought this father with these 2 little children needs this money. And then we began to walk away. We had already said our goodbyes to everyone. As the other immigrants saw us place that money in that father's hands, there was this silence, this expectant silence. And I knew they wondered whether we would be helping them in the same way, but we'd given Jocelyn and Melvin's father all the money that we had. And so we started to walk away, and it broke my heart because I wanted to help all of them, but I couldn't, and I couldn't even look at them. So I started to walk away, and my colleague Bill started to walk by my side as well, and we looked forward, and then suddenly, out of the silence came this joy, and these expressions that you know and that I know. It was the expression, gracias, hermano. Gracias, hermano. Thank you, my brother. And I turned around and observed Melvin and Jocelyn's father taking the very few dollars that we had given him and sharing them with the other immigrants. It was the sight and it was the sound of God's rain. It was the sight and it was the sound of God's own justice. And on that afternoon, my heart was reformed. A reformation that I long for our country and for every community of faith. I will pray for that day without ceasing. Thank you.
We've come to question time. If you have any questions for Bishop Masaro, you are please invited to come forward. Oh, yeah, there's a microphone. Yeah, there's also one. So there are two microphones, but there's somebody else. You know, two microphones and ask a question. Questions? Arising from the comments, queries, concerns. Do you mind using the mic?
We all want to hear. There are many people of non-faith, people who don't claim any particular faith tradition that are very engaged in this particular justice issue. I've walked with them in the desert looking for the bodies of immigrants. They do it out of a sense of justice. I believe that there is an innate sense of justice within each one of us. And so it is about justice. All of us come to that understanding through our own life and how we have been formed. But I do believe that there is an innate sense of justice in each one of us. So for you, it may be love for neighbor, love for others, a sense of connectedness with others. And I think that that's where we come together Jocelyn and Melvin and their father, I have no idea whether they have any sense of Christian faith. They did not know that I was a Christian, much less a bishop of the church. But there was a human connection. I felt their pain. And they made me a better person by showing me what it means to be people who care about others. And so I left with a reformed heart in that experience of just having watched them be kind and compassionate and merciful towards others.
Sorry, the second part was a lot better because I don't know, personally, I understand the idea of like the human connection and stuff, but then at the same time, it's like, I've met other people before, it's like, the reason why they're like, they don't want to complete a program or participate in a program because it's Christian-led, you know, or it's specifically led by a specific group. It's like, well, how do you make, I guess in my sense, it's like, how do you deal with that problem and make, I guess, that more inclusive environment? You did mention, like, you know, you not to integrate things, and I think that is like the problem. Well, that's something that we do need to work on as well, is like creating interfaith between not just Christians, but also with other Abrahamic faiths. So that's why I was just, I guess, I don't know, maybe I'll think about the answer, and
That's a good push.
I'll let it see it.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. It's a human issue. It's a human issue.
Yeah, this is kind of, my name is Jeremy too. On the same topic, in addition to the borders, how do you reach out to immigrants who may not be religious and may not come to a church event? Because I was thinking of friends of mine who are adopted, and many of them are not religious and would not necessarily go to a church event because they're atheist.
I think you reach out to them by finding out what their journey is. Are they documented? Are they not documented? What's their struggle? Are they being treated fairly where they work? Many undocumented immigrants go and get a job and then are paid pittance, not enough to maintain life. Is that their circumstance? How can you walk with them in those kinds of situations? If a young person in school is being picked on, bullied, discriminated against because they're undocumented, can you walk with them in that setting as well? So it's about finding out what's going on with them and seeing how you might walk alongside them. And not only that, have them walk alongside you as well. Yeah, the life experiences of the issue.
Yeah, I think it's more like asking what your faith community does to reach out to and documenting people who may not be public.
Oh, I see. I had not understood your question. We don't ask whether people are Christian. We don't ask if they're Methodist. We are simply working for comprehensive immigration for all undocumented immigrants, for the whole immigrant community. We don't ask whether they're brown or black or Asian or they come from Europe. It's a justice, a global justice issue.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question. Could you speak specifically about the work they do and how you use the religious community to educate and organize around the issue of immigration? And also, a second part of the question is, what can we do to unite people in this room to help with the issue?
There are a number of things that we're doing. The day after I was privileged to be at President Obama's unveiling of his immigration plan, I wrote a report to our Council of Bishops, and I said, here's the report, here's what I heard, this is what we can do. We can all write to our congressional leaders. We can blog about this concern. We can organize prayer rituals. We can organize opportunities for people learning about immigration, learning about where we stand as people of Christian faith, as United Methodist in this case. We are also organizing legal clinics all across the country to assist immigrants. They're called Justice for Our Neighbor clinics. And those are free clinics to help those who are undocumented. We are creating conversation groups among women, asking them to invite immigrant women to come join them in conversation so that we learn about each other's situation. So those are some of the things that we are doing. Some of us will be in Washington, D.C. in February, and then we'll meet with our senators and representatives to say we stand for comprehensive immigration reform, and we'll have a meeting with President Obama's staff who's been devoted and dedicated to immigration reform to say what we do, how do we help you move this issue. What we've heard from the White House consistently in all the years that we've been working towards comprehensive immigration reform is that they get all the letters from the negative side. They get very few letters, contacts, calls from those who favor comprehensive immigration reform. So we need to up that number. We really do. Yes?
Can you give us a website that we might refer to a few weeks from now or 6 weeks from now when some legislation is finally getting to a point that really is seriously being debated in Congress? Because I've learned tonight more than I knew about the amount of money we've already spent on border security. And what I need to be saying to two senators and a representative are focus more on the issues that are damaging either to citizenship or legal immigration, as opposed to thinking that you have to go spend another 10 days on the negative stuff.
One website would be the Interfaith Immigration Coalition. That would be one website. Another one, because I mentioned detention centers, would be the Detention Watch Network. In each of our denominations, there are immigration offices as well, or at least statements and declarations. The Catholic Conference, the Conference of Catholic Bishops, they have done quite a bit about immigration. So just Google their line. There's much work there. Mainline Protestants, Jewish congregations have done a great deal of work as well. But the Interfaith Immigration Coalition is one that gathers us all in, and we're all working hard with. Thank you. Thank you all so very much.